What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Happiness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Amy Climer, who just published a book on creative teams and how to facilitate the process as a leader or even as a facilitator, and how it can become possible to scale innovation of teams towards organizations. So stay tuned. And don't forget to scroll down to the show notes to find more links to connect to the guest, her book and insights, and to subscribe to this podcast if you enjoy our conversation. Thank you for listening. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
I'm excited. And it's one of those things that took the time they needed to take. I think we were first in contact a few years ago, and it didn't work out for us to have this conversation. And then it was Oscar Trimboli who put us back in touch. And with every interaction we had, my curiosity just grew.
So likewise.
Seems to be like the right moment.
I love it. Here we are.
And congratulations, you just published your book.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it.
Creative teams.
Yes.
Yes. And yeah, I'm just curious to hear about creative teams, what it takes, and what we can do to get them there, if there is something we can do.
There is a lot we can do, especially as facilitators. So I'm excited to talk about it.
I was hoping you would say that.
Of course, I wrote a whole book on it. And it's interesting. The book is for leaders who want their teams to be more creative. But I really feel like it's for facilitators in a way. And that the leaders who lead it, or the leaders who read it and then try to implement it, they need to have some facilitation skills. So
thank you for saying that. And before we go into the nitty-gritty parts of that, when did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
It was actually a long time ago. In college, I took a course on facilitation, and I don't actually remember if it was a credit-based course, but I was part of this program at the university I went to that was all about taking people out into a wilderness environment, backpacking, rock climbing, canoeing, and facilitating them through this experience, but really pulling out like, okay, you just learned how to rock climb, but let's talk about taking risks back in other parts of life and the connection. And so I learned how to lead those conversations. And then also in college, I was trained in how to lead like team building or ropes course programs. And I was initially really, really shy and nervous. I know most people don't know that about me. But yeah, so it was a long journey, but I think it was, in college in the 90s that I started calling myself a facilitator.
That is so cool. And what an experience.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of the most impactful experiences that I learned that at an early age, because what I'm seeing now as an adult is that it's one of those skills that no matter what role you have professionally, you're probably at some point going to need to facilitate something. So you might as well be good at it.
100%. And even if it's just your partner or your family.
Right, exactly. Or family meeting or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I love about it is that you immediately get the hands-on experience, because you can theorize of what it means to take risks and how a group of strangers or a team acts in a situation where all the different personalities stand out, because someone loves rock climbing and someone hates it and someone is afraid and someone wants to run ahead. And to really bring it into the practical experience. I think that's really gold.
It really is. It's so much more powerful than just talking about taking risks while sitting in a classroom. It's like, no, let's go take some risks. And if this feels really easy for you, we can add more risk. Like, okay, you just climbed up this route on this rock face really easily and that you didn't seem very scared. Put on a blindfold and now do it. And does that change anything? Yeah. And if nothing else, it's just an experiment, an experience. And so, yeah, it's very valuable, I think, to be in situations like if you want to look at risk, go take some risks.
Yeah. And if someone doesn't feel the risk of rock climbing, how risky does it feel to share their feelings with the group or other situations? Yeah. And how did you then get into, you said that you were initially shy and you don't even know whether it was a credit program. So how did you develop then your fascination for teams?
Well, it was definitely during college where I was interested in like bringing groups together and sort of, I would lead these weekend trips. So say it was like a backpacking trip and we'd go from Friday through Sunday and it was part of this organized program. And it was fascinating how by Sunday the group would be really close, like and connected to each other. And then, a couple weeks later, I'd see somebody on campus and they'd give me this huge hug, like, "Oh my gosh, that was such a cool experience." And sometimes they would come back for another program, but just seeing the impact of that, I was really interested in teams and how they worked. But even so, in college, so I have a biology degree, and I thought, okay, this was a cool experience. I'm now going to go and have my biology career. And my first job after college, I worked for the United States Forest Service, and I moved from North Carolina, where I went to school, to Washington State, which is about as far away as you can get. And it was just a temporary, like 6-month job. I was a stream surveyor. And it was interesting on one level, but by the end of the season, I thought, I don't know if I see myself doing this type of thing for a whole career, especially as I was looking at the professionals who were, higher above me and paying attention to what they did. But meanwhile, I really missed the facilitation and working with groups. And so after that experience with the Forest Service, I spent a couple of years in some different roles that were, related to kind of outdoor education, where I was leading groups through team building programs or on longer trips. I think the longest at that point I did was a 21-day trip that involved backpacking, rock climbing, rafting in Colorado. And I realized I really like this, and I think I want to make a career out of this. And so a couple years after I finished my undergrad, I went to get my master's degree in outdoor education, which is really about how do you teach people through experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And had a lot of amazing experiences with teams.
And I love this shift from hard science, biology, to what is often called soft, although human psychology is involved. So it's definitely hard.
Yeah, exactly. It's way more difficult.
Yes. Yeah. And do you still think that your biology lens has shaped the way you look at teams? Because I often hear, and I had a conversation recently with someone, with Jimmy, who said that he finds a lot of inspiration in quantum physics. So when he looks at teams or groups, he thinks of the entanglement, that everything is connected, and the spooky actions in what they do. Do you have the same with biology? We're like, when I look at these groups, I think of molecules.
Yeah, actually, somebody pointed out to me maybe a year or so ago that I might be pulling on my biology degree because I'm very interested in the systems between people, both in the relationship systems, but then also just like the systems we can create in our work life to make things easier. And they said, "Oh, well, maybe that's because you have a biology background." And I thought, "Oh, you know what? You might be right. I hadn't put it together." So I think that that's one angle, is that just seeing the systems and thinking of ecology and how everything connects together. And then I'm also very interested in the research behind what we do. That was one thing that if you read my book, Deliberate Creative Teams, you'll find it's heavily research based. That it's based on my research, but also on the research of hundreds of other people. That I didn't want it to just be this book that was like, oh, here's some ideas I have. That I really wanted it to be grounded in but what do we actually know? What does science know? And so I think that early biology degree has, influenced me throughout my career.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I'm always fascinated how this early academic lens actually shapes the way how we see the world. And for me, it's similar. So the way how I approach group work is always, I think, inspired by economics
Mm.
and
Is that your
behavioral
background?
economics. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
So say more about that. Like, how does the economics impact how you see groups?
The individual decision making,
Mm.
the trade-offs, the biases, the different types. Yes, some are maybe more egotistic than others, but what is actually driving our behavior and our decision making? What can be the factors that can shift that? Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, and I think too, it's like those individual decisions that we all make, they impact the group so much.
Yeah.
And if we shift those a little bit, that can also impact the group, which I feel like is really exciting.
Totally. Yeah, we can crowd in and crowd out ideas. Which is also crowding in, crowding out is also an economic concept of investments. How do you attract investments by private companies? Anyway, this is a tangent. Okay, now I need to fill this bracket. I have the impression. So when I say crowding in ideas, I mean having a prompt that really tickles the group that they come up with more ideas. When I say crowding out ideas, then I put my ideas into the group and then it's like a leadership bias. They jump on that idea and they forget about their own. And in economics, it would be that if a large organization is crowding in investments, it means that they show that they're trusting. Hence, they invest a little bit to bring even more small investors in. If they're crowding out, then they invest so much that drives the price higher. And then the smaller investors would not jump on the project.
Oh, that's interesting. I love that parallel. Yeah, I don't think I knew that phrase crowding in and out, especially in the economic angle. That makes so much sense. Yeah, and I do think that's something like leaders have to be aware that because sometimes if you're in a leadership role within a team, whatever you say can carry a little bit more weight. And so you want to use that sparingly if you really want the collaboration from the team. And so if you throw out your thought, you might be crowding out those other ideas.
Yeah.
And that you don't want to get in the habit of that.
Exactly. Or at least be aware of the consequences.
Yeah, exactly.
So what is it that then makes teams creative?
Well, I was very curious about this early in my career, and I ended up doing my dissertation research on this. And I don't know if you've had this experience. It's one that I'd had many times where I had been in some teams that were highly creative, and I just loved being a part of them. I felt energized. I looked forward to the team meetings. And then I was on other teams where I dreaded it. And I felt just less creative sitting at the table with the group. And so when I went to get my PhD, I really wanted to look at what's the difference between these two groups.
And before we go there, I would love to just disentangle a little bit. What do we understand by this creativity? Because what I hear and what happens, so I immediately have a picture in my mind. And for me, this kind of creativity would be yes-anding each other, building on ideas, connecting different aspects, different ideas to come up with something new.
Yeah. So the definition of creativity that I use, that I did not come up with, this comes from the research literature, but the simple version is creativity is novelty that is valuable. So novel meaning like new, different, unique, original, kind of that's what novel is. But then there's also this value to it. I mean, we've certainly seen plenty of things that are novel that like nobody cared about. But the value, I think, is the hard part, because then it's like, well, who decides what's valuable? And what do you mean by value? And it could be financially valuable. That's certainly where we often go with business. But it could be something that's going to make you more efficient or productive, or it's just something that makes you feel good. You like it. Like there's that aesthetic value. And it could just be, in the eye of the beholder. It doesn't mean everyone has to like it. But in some way, it's providing some value or benefit or use, or however you want to look at that. But creativity is novelty that is valuable.
Okay, thank you. So there is a difference in teams who create valuable novelty by interacting with each others.
Absolutely.
While others don't.
Yeah.
And what I heard in how you described it, there's also an impact of that on external. So creative teams then create an energy where others around them might also become more creative. Is this what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I love that. In fact, I have this like scale sort of from low to high, this model in the book. And the top level of the scale that teams could be is scalable, meaning their creativity is, they got it nailed down so well that they're able to do it consistently, but it's scalable in the sense that they're influencing other teams that they work with. And now they're not just impacting the creativity that they're creating or the innovation they're creating, but also it's like spreading throughout the organization.
Contagious creativity.
Yeah. I love it.
And is this something where there's a process behind it?
Yes. And
how does this creativity emerge? Yeah.
Okay, so what I found in the research is there's 3 elements that teams need if they want to be creative together. And here, I'll put a little visual up. So there's like a 3-part Venn diagram. So then I was going to say on the top, but it's actually not hierarchical. But on the top is team purpose. So teams have to have a clear sense of purpose. Like, what are we doing together? Why do we work together? Why do we meet? Sometimes this is really obvious, like the marketing team, that's maybe built into their title, but it's sometimes difficult for teams to verbalize what their purpose is. So I've even had executive teams who couldn't name their team purpose. And so then there's work to do.
Interesting. And then I think on the second degree, and I think we spoke about that in our exploration call, is how many teams are actually not teams, but just groups.
Oh, yes. Yeah, like the difference between a team and a group.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we can get into that.
This may be a tangent.
Yeah. Sorry. So the next circle here that I found was that teams need to have a high level of team dynamics, like strong team dynamics. And that includes trust, communication, conflict. Like they need to be able to at least have a moderate level of trust with each other, enough trust that I could put an idea out on a table and I know I'm not going to get shot down. I don't need to trust them to, the level that I might trust my spouse, but I need to be comfortable. Psychological safety is another term you probably have talked about on this show.
Yeah.
And
I love that you said conflict.
Yes.
Because it's the way how we deal with we do need the conflict to inspire maybe creativity, because if we all agree, there's very little novelty coming out of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of danger in never disagreeing, because usually if a team is not disagreeing, it's a kind of a fake harmony. And that, another term for that is groupthink, that we're just going to all agree. But actually behind the scenes, we really don't. And so that causes a lot of problems. And that's when bad decisions are made. It's like, if your team's talking through a decision and you disagree with it, it's your responsibility to speak up. It's also the team dynamics there, that responsibility of the team to create an environment where that can happen, that it's appropriate and it's comfortable enough. I mean, it's always a little uncomfortable to speak up.
And I have a follow-up question to that, but I first want you to finish the Venn diagram.
Okay. And then, so we have team purpose, team dynamics, and this third one is team creative process. And that's, does the team member know and use a creative process? And that's the area that most teams, they struggle with. They don't even know there could be a process to be creative. And so my work with clients we spend a lot of time in that circle, helping them understand the process.
I love that. And I will park this here. The process is right there. Yeah. And before that, ask, what is the role of the team itself? How much is driven by this team and how much is driven by the leader? Because I can imagine that, especially for the dynamics and to exemplify what kind of conflict we want to have and what feels safe and what doesn't, there's often a leader who would need to model it and maybe call behavior out that doesn't belong.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like a both and. Like the leader plays a critical role, but so does every single team member.
Mm.
And I remember this team that I worked with a few years ago. They were really struggling and they asked me to come in and facilitate a staff retreat. And there was one person who was not the team leader, and she was so toxic. And to the point where I felt like this is more of like a therapeutic need, like beyond what, I can facilitate this day and provide some guidance, but this is like this person needs deep therapy in order to change their behavior. And it was one of these moments where like the leader could actually be incredible. And would they still be able to provide a positive environment for everyone given this one person's just horrible behavior? Now, all that being said, that is the exception. I think most cases that's not true, and that most people are willing and able to look at their own behavior. And I think it's one of the most powerful things team members can do is to I was going to say monitor the behavior. I don't mean in the sense of like always being like, oh my gosh, am I doing the right thing? But just paying attention of how you're showing up.
Self-awareness, kind of a healthy degree of self-awareness and maybe maturity.
Absolutely. Yes, I think that's it. Self-awareness and maturity kind of come together, and now you have emotional intelligence.
Yeah. And what I just wrote down, what came to my mind, and maybe primed by your background in our conversation about biology. What is nature and what is nurture? In the sense of what is nature of you recruit the right people for the team. And what is nurture? You come to the team and therefore you become this creative being.
Yeah, that's the age-old question, isn't it? Like, there's not really a right answer for that. And I also think there's so many skills someone can show up with, right? That certainly if you have the opportunity to bring in someone with a high level of those interpersonal skills, they understand how to work well with other people, they understand even the nuance of somebody throws out an idea and you don't like the idea, how do you respond in that moment? Or do you wait until a better moment? And that takes, I think, a certain level of nuance and finesse and just like communication skills. You could teach that to someone for sure. It's a lot easier if maybe they learned that earlier on in their life, their career. Some people I think grow up in an environment where they're seeing that behavior modeled, and other people grow up in an environment where they're seeing a lot of conflict and disagreement, and all of that impacts how we show up at work.
Yeah. 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 And then there's this it almost seems like this magical moment, or it almost seems like a miracle when the right team members come together. And even if someone does not watch their words and might say something that in another context would be offensive, but there's so much trust and so much safety that this is how they roll.
Yeah. That's, I feel like, when you have a really amazing team, when team members really give grace to each other and they welcome each other's, quirks and nuances and just awkwardness, and because we're all awkward, right? And yeah. And if you think not everyone's awkward, if you ask them, they're going to say they feel awkward. So we all feel awkward to some degree. And I think that when a team can really embrace that and just like roll with it and not get judgmental about each other, it can be really powerful. Because now each person can really show up and bring those skills that they have, their intelligence, their knowledge, their ideas, that if they're being ridiculed or shot down, they're just going to shut down.
Yeah. And my gut would tell me that it's easier, or it's very fragile, and one rotten apple can destroy all of that. Although it can also be contagious in the other direction.
Totally. Yeah.
So before we go into the process bubble, maybe you've learned something from the obstacles to growing this highly creative team. And what are the early warning signs that you're like, okay, this team member just needs to leave? Or maybe you're not that extreme because there's always hope.
I think my first reaction would be that there's always hope. So if I'm, part of a group or facilitating a group and I see something and I'm like, I don't know about this. My first reaction would be to ask questions and to talk with that person and not just in one day, but over a period of time, because sometimes I think they just have never thought about another way. And so they're showing up the way they are because that's what they know. And they may be completely unaware that it's impacting other people negatively, or they may be aware, but they don't know what to do about it. And so my first reaction would be, yes, like if this person can get some coaching and training and guidance, that's amazing. And I really think that only works if they want it, if they're interested in it. And if they're, completely against it, that can be really hard and maybe it's not the right fit. Mm-hmm. I have had some situations, and you may have had this too, where I've shown up at an organization and we're doing, a day or 2-day training on deliberate creative teams. And there's often a couple of people who've been around for a long time. In fact, a recent manufacturing company I worked with, there was one guy who'd been there for 40 years. And so, he's a bit curmudgeon and he's like, oh gosh, what is this training about? This is, he's all grumpy and
you've been there so many times.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so at face value, initially, I might have just dismissed him. And at the end, he came up to me and he said, wow, this might be the best training I've been to in my life. And he had learned things that he was able to start applying and shifting some of his behavior. And not to say he was a toxic person or a difficult person per se, but he was really resistant at first. And I think this happens a lot. I was going to say, especially in teams that have been together for a while, but even with new teams where maybe people don't yet know how to be a team, or they're bringing in some previous experiences. And I don't know, I guess I've leaned more towards the side of being an optimist.
I love that. Thank you. And it just reminded me of what you said before about or what we spoke about the conflict. And if everyone is aligned, then there's little space for creativity. And it almost sounds as if we all have our insecurities, right? And then, especially someone who has been there for 40 years, I can just feel how frustrating it must be that nobody really listens. They've been through so many reorganizations and reshuffles. Every situation has been there at some point, but nobody asked them because they're all considered, this old dude, they don't know anything.
Exactly.
So all this frustration coming up. And then it's about channeling this kind of grain of salt or this potential to look at things from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think sometimes the naysayers can become the biggest advocates. And that's when you're like, okay, we are good now.
True. And once they're convinced, then you really have the advocates and the change makers.
Yeah. And then I think other people see like, oh, wow, okay, if they're convinced, this must be really good.
Exactly. So I'm taking the process bubble off the shelf that it was sparking there.
Sounds great.
I'm very curious, because when you speak of scalability of creativity, and especially under the complexities that we only slightly touched upon, what is the magic sauce of this process that doesn't kill creativity, that enhances it and scales it?
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting is there's a lot of myths around creativity. And one of those is that, we just get these ideas that come out of nowhere and then we implement them. And, it's like the light bulb goes off and then we're all good. And I do love the light bulb as a motif or as a symbol of creativity. But what I really like about it is the history of how Thomas Edison, who did not invent the light bulb, but he designed the one that really led to like mass use, that his team went through 2,700 iterations before they got to one that worked well. And I mean, it's just mind-boggling. I can't even really fathom what that must have been like.
Especially back then.
Right. I mean, you're keeping track of everything on paper.
Yes.
They probably repeated a few things and didn't realize it. But I think that if you really look at, if you go back and look at creativity of any situation, you'll see that it actually follows a fairly similar process every time. And so other researchers and scientists and artists and creatives have codified this. And there's a process, and I'll show you another visual. This one is called creative problem solving. There are many out there, human-centered design thinking, TRIZ, synectics. But if you take all of these and you lay them next to each other, they're basically more or less the same thing with different labels for the stages. So here's the one that I teach. It's called creative problem solving. And there's these 4 stages that you have done. We've all done this in our life. So let's say you're trying to be more creative with, I don't know, maybe a workshop you're designing. Mm-hmm. And so you start off at the top, which is clarify. And that clarify stage, that's where you're asking questions. You're trying to understand, like, okay, what does this group need? What's the purpose here? You're just getting all this background information. From there, you generate lots of ideas. Once you have a better sense of the problem, you generate lots of ideas. And hopefully, like some teams, what I've noticed is they'll generate 3, 4, 5 ideas and call it good. And I'm saying, like, what if you generate dozens? What if you get over 100? Now it could be really interesting. So you generate lots of ideas. And then from there, you take the best ideas and develop them further. So, when you first have an idea, it's a couple sentences, build that out. And like, well, what if we tried this? What would happen? So you develop that idea further, and then finally you implement it. Now we can go through this process really quick, like 5 minutes, 1 minute even, or it might take months, years, depending on the level of the problem. Now, here's the challenge we all have, is that all of us have a preference for one or more of these stages. There's this assessment tool called Foresight, which measures these stages or measures our preference. And so what happens, like for me, I love ideating and I love implementing. And both these things I get a lot of energy out of. And when I can clarify and develop, mostly because I've kind of taught myself how to do that, like force myself, but that is more draining to me. Mm-hmm. So my preference would be, well, let's just skip it. Let's just jump right into ideas. But obviously, if I don't know what the problem is and don't understand it, what's the point? Like, I'm generating ideas for nothing, right?
Yeah.
So when groups understand this, they can be more intentional about going through that process. And they can also start to understand those moments where they might kind of butt heads a little bit. Like if I'm a strong ideator and you're a strong clarifier, and you want to ask a bunch of questions and I want to generate ideas.
You get annoyed, I get annoyed.
Exactly. Unless we know we're going through this process. And right now we're in the clarify stage and it is your space. And I'm like here to support you. And I'm just hanging tight till it's my turn. But we're still doing it together. We're still collaborating.
I love that how the process of creativity links to the personality types. And might then even explain why some teams are more effective in their creativity than others, because if one type is missing or another is overrepresented.
Yeah.
Because I assume also that the clarifying ones are usually the more introverted, the think to speakers, the ideators are the speak to thinkers, so they're louder, so they tend to dominate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is where I think as a facilitator, we can set up processes or techniques in the moment that do a better job of getting all the voices in the room so that the louder folks aren't the only ones speaking, that we hear from the folks who might be a little bit quieter, but actually might have some really good ideas.
So I realized that there's one question that I haven't asked, which is so obvious. Yeah, and then we see where we go next. Deliberate creativity. Where does this word come from and what is the meaning that it made it to the title of your book?
Yeah, I think it is super important because creativity will not happen by accident. And we have all of these myths in our culture, at least in the US, and I don't know about Europe or Australia, but we have all these myths that perpetuate that creativity is just going to happen. And it's not true. It actually is a very deliberate process. And if you really look at people who are creative or creative inventions, you'll see that there was a lot of intentionality behind it. And I think one of those myths that we share is the story of Sir Isaac Newton when he discovered gravity. And do you know this story?
Please tell it.
So the story goes that he was sitting under an apple tree and eating lunch. This is like in the 1600s. So he's sitting there eating lunch, and all of a sudden this apple fell out of the tree and hit him on the head. And in that split second, he realized gravity was a thing. He shouted, "Eureka!" And then he announced that gravity exists. Okay, it's so ridiculous, actually. It's not at all what happened. So what we think we know is that he was sitting under a tree or near a tree. He did see an apple fall. But I mean, how many other millions of people had seen an apple fall at this point in our history? So he sees this apple fall, but at that point, he was in his mid-20s. He already had a degree from Cambridge University. He already had a degree in math and physics. He'd already done the work to develop calculus. But this wasn't just like your average guy, right? He was really digging deep into understanding math and how the world works together. So we think that at that moment, it did spark a thought for him. He then spent 21 years trying to understand, why do things fall down and not float or fall sideways? And 21 years later, he wrote a book or published a book called Principia, which laid out the universal laws of of motion. And so it's, we think that like you're going to just have this idea like eureka, and you're just going to shout and you're going to like be this brilliant human. And that's not what happens. And usually when you have an idea for something, it might come in a moment, but it's usually something you've been thinking about or you've been exploring before. Maybe not at that very minute. And that's kind of the cool thing about our brain, is that it's working even when we don't know it's working. But you're usually not getting ideas for something you've never thought about before.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. And then I wonder, so this eureka moment, whether this is the curiosity, because so digging so deep to take 21 years to stay with the problem or a curiosity.
Yeah.
Takes a lot of commitment.
It does.
And I think the art of seeing something that others don't, or questioning something that everyone sees but nobody has questioned before. That's where the curiosity starts. And then the creativity is maybe the craft and the hard work around it.
Yeah. I do think that curiosity is a key piece of being creative, and that we're asking questions, we're looking at things from a different angle, we're open to ideas. I'm trying to imagine like what creativity would be like without some curiosity. It's sort of hard to fathom.
Yeah. And then I can also imagine that curiosity is something that we can actually learn. Because very often we don't ask questions because we don't know enough to start with. But once we learn a little bit, we're like, oh, and then this entire world opens.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, this friend of mine, his name's James Robillata, and he designed this sweatshirt that I wear a lot, and it says, "Curiosity is a choice." And I really like that. It's like, I can choose to be curious about anything and ask questions and dig in. But yeah, it's a choice we can make.
And it's, the thing that I think of, the thought that I came up with is that we cannot be curious and X at the same time. We cannot be curious and angry. We cannot be curious and fearful and all these things. So if we choose to be curious, we'll also be more cheerful and happy and have an easier life in general.
I mean, I think that's such a good mindset for teams, in that if there's somebody who Like there's a story I shared in my book that is a story I think many of us have experienced where this is early in my career. I'm in my 20s and I was part of this team. And I just remember one day this teammate came to a meeting. She's like, okay, y'all, I have this challenge. I really could use some ideas. Could we just spend a few minutes brainstorming? Everyone's like, yeah, of course, let's go. So she explains the problem, she clarifies, and then we start generating ideas. And it was like the fourth idea. This colleague in the book, I call him Phil, and Phil says, oh no, we did that in 1985 and it was a complete disaster. And of course, I actually thought he was joking at the time and I started laughing. And then I got this like evil look that he was not joking. I was like, oh my God, okay. But I wish in the moment I had asked questions and been more curious about his response of like, oh, tell us what happened in 1985. That might help us. Or, what did you try or what led to the failure of this problem? And if we had dug into that for a few minutes, that might have helped us, one, stay on track. Because, of course, after he makes this comment, nobody was sharing any more ideas. Like the whole thing was over, right? But it might have kept us in this like divergent thinking phase of generating ideas. But instead, it shut it down. And then actually months later, I had this interaction with him where I realized he actually really was creative. And there was something happening when he came to work where he was sort of shutting that down. And so I guess my point is that in the moment in a team meeting or in a, interaction, if we go to those situations with a sense of curiosity, it can really change the team dynamics.
Yeah. Also reminding me of the person you cited, you mentioned earlier, who was working for the company for 40 years. He might have come up. He could be a Phil.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which leads me to innovation. Does innovation always involve creativity?
Yeah, I think it goes back to those definitions. So creativity is novelty that is valuable. And the way I think of innovation is that it's basically creativity with economic gain. And if you really start thinking about how we use these terms, that we use the term creativity a lot in the arts, humanities, literature. We say, oh, that person's a really creative artist or a creative writer. But then over in the sciences, technology, we tend to use the word innovation more.
Interesting.
But we could say an artist like Georgia O'Keeffe was innovative, but we usually just say she's creative. Not just, but we usually say she's creative. Or we could say someone like Steve Jobs from Apple was creative, but usually we say he was innovative. The way I look at it is it's actually the same thing. They're both following the same process. Some people say that creativity is just the ideas and that innovation is the implementation. I disagree with that. And the research that, came up with this creative problem solving process, like implementation is one of the 4 stages. And I think that's so important because it's iterative. And so we implement something, we learn from it, we're then, using what we learned to make it better. I mean, ideas are a dime a dozen, really. I mean, I feel like we could, have 20 people in the room, we give everybody the same idea and say, go do something with this idea. And you're going to come back with 20 vastly different results.
Yeah.
So to me, creativity and innovation are basically the same thing, but innovation tends to be more, usually we think more of like that financial focus. And so sometimes I do have clients, this is kind of unusual. Usually these people don't end up being my clients, where a CEO or somebody will say to me, oh yeah, I want my team to be innovative, but I don't want them to be creative. And I just sort of have to laugh. Like, well, okay, but what they usually mean is they're afraid of like that fluffiness or they think of creativity as frivolous or not important. And, it just goes back to the myths and understanding what it all really is.
Yeah, the messiness before it lands, the tangents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's part of it. It's, a big part of being creative is divergent thinking, which in the name, divergent means you're going to be diverging and getting off track. Whoa. Our Zoom screen just got balloons.
Yes, they came out of nothing.
I guess they like the divergent thinking idea.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. And so I think sometimes leaders can get really nervous about the divergences because they think like it's a waste of time or it's frivolous. And it's like, well, it's just part of the process. It doesn't mean you're doing or implementing these frivolous ideas. Just hang tight and keep going. And often those ideas that might seem a little silly at first can lead to really cool things.
Yeah. And without having the clarity at first, the likelihood is very low that they will actually lead to something.
Yeah, exactly. You got to clarify what the problem is. Because the other thing that happens there, if you skip the clarify stage, is that often you're solving the wrong problem. You think the problem is over here and it's actually over there. And through the clarifying process, you'll figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so I wonder what are the characteristics or the strengths of a leader of these deliberately creative teams? Because I have the impression that they need to have a high understanding, at least, or tolerance of these tangents and creativity and messiness, and be very clear and determined on the focus and the meaningful progress.
Yeah, I think that's really important. For leaders to be open-minded can go a long way. That can be really helpful. I also think it can be helpful if they're able to facilitate and to lead the team through a process. It can be helpful too if the team understands the process and what's needed for creativity. Some of my clients have started buying the book that I wrote, Deliberate Creative Teams. They've started buying it for their whole team or their whole organization because there's a real value if everybody can follow along and knows what we're doing, as opposed to just the leader having this secret process that no one really is aware of.
It's like when everyone in the team learns what it takes to have an effective meeting, and everyone can help steer it and co-facilitate and jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it goes back to what we were saying a little while ago of how each team member plays such a critical role. And, if everyone understands what an effective meeting is, everyone knows oh, okay, at the end, we're going to clarify who's doing what next, or, whatever the guidelines are. That can be really cool.
And when you say that it is scalable, it would mean on an organizational level that the entire organization follows these kind of steps, but on different levels.
Yeah, I mean, imagine, you have an organization with many, many teams in it, and every team knows and understands this, deliberate creative teams model, and they know and use a creative process. I mean, to me, it's just mind-boggling, like the impact they could have, like the level of innovation they could produce as needed. Their ability to respond to problems or respond to change just is going to skyrocket.
And what do you think is in the way? Is it mindset, skill set, lack of process?
Yes.
All of the above.
Yeah. I think I think it varies so much from person to person, right? But I think a lot of it is just a lack of knowing, at least when it comes to being creative, because I think that creativity is sort of a relatively newer field. There was this moment in 1950 where the president of the American Psychological Association gave this speech, and he said, hey, we need to do more research on creativity. And since then, there's been this exponential increase of research. And it's really interesting to see the impact of that one speech. But before 1950, we knew almost nothing. And really, I would say even just the last 20 years, are we really getting a deeper understanding of creativity in teams and at an organizational level and the role a leader plays. So it's still pretty new. So there's plenty of people who are in leadership roles today that when they started, we knew very little about creativity and had a lot of myths about it. So I feel like that, like the field of creativity is a little bit behind like the field of leadership. Like if you think about it, in the 1950s, there was a belief that leaders are born, not made.
Mm-hmm.
And now we think that's ridiculous. Like, of course, someone can become a better leader. Of course, they can get training and grow. And like, there's all these things they can learn to become a better leader. And creativity is the same thing. I think we're a little bit behind that. Like, some people get it that we can be more creative with practice or with intention. Others, that's still a new idea to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all to say. That's why I think that just even understanding how creativity works can be huge for leaders.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think the notion of psychological safety and how do we create the environments to be more creative.
Yeah, that's huge.
Because it also, what comes to my mind is this notion that we have to slow down to speed up.
Yes.
Because this messiness takes time. So you first have to take 5 steps back before you can take 1 step forward.
Mm-hmm. I love, yes, I'm a big fan of that phrase, like, slow down to speed up, go slow to go fast. I do think it's a challenge that organizations have right now is that our world has gotten so fast. The fact that you and I are right now in different countries and on this video call, it just speaks to the speed that we can work at. And if organizations can slow down just a touch, when I work with my clients, one of the biggest, when I ask, what's getting in your way of creativity, every place I go, some people say time. We don't have time. And I think it's like you're adding this new stuff onto people, these new tasks or projects or duties, but then not letting go of anything.
Yeah.
And so then there's just this weight that I can't add anymore. And if we could slow down, it's like, okay, let's just examine what might we get rid of? What's no longer serving us? What might we automate? What might we do with AI? That's, a new question we can ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all of that will help organizations be more innovative. They slow tab.
And I have the secret hope that now with everything accelerating even faster with AI, that there is no other way than slowing down. Because speeding up, we will run ourselves to death.
It's already happening. Yeah.
So and I've seen and identified that for myself.
Yeah.
That, okay, everything is so fast. So I just stop running and focus on what's important right now, just for my mental health.
Yeah. Well, I got to give you credit because even I've been on many podcasts and the fact that you're like, yeah, we're going to take an hour and a half or however long we need. And we're just going to be present in the conversation where so many shows are like, okay, the average commute is 25 minutes. So we're going to get this done in 25 minutes. And, it still can be a good conversation. You can say a lot in 25 minutes. And sometimes it feels like it wraps up a bit too soon. Like, oh, well, we were just getting into the good stuff,
Absolutely. And I think we do need time to create the curiosity in the first place. So between us, but also to the audience. And this takes time. I've been on podcasts where there was no exploration call at all. So I would jump into a conversation, then I had to be the best version of myself without knowing the person and the purpose and any of that. Yeah. I think that asking a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And it's like on both ends, when we can slow down and maybe show up a bit more prepared, I think it creates for a richer experience.
Yeah. And I wonder, have you thought of writing a shorter book? Because the attention span, because the average reader doesn't read below the first 100 pages.
Yeah. It's not that long. It's only, I guess it's about 200 pages. I don't even remember. About 190 pages. No, I'm not going to write a shorter book.
Right? And then don't we trust the audience that if they're interested in the content, they will stretch it over 2 commutes?
Yes.
That would be a creative solution. So I think by trying to assume what our target audience preference is and then squeezing the form into an assumption instead of trusting that they can choose what's best for them and always aiming for the highest quality, no matter what.
Yeah, I think that was my thought with the writing. I didn't even think about the length, to be honest. It was more, what does the reader need? What do they need in order, if a leader is reading this book and they want to be more creative, they want their team to be more creative, and they don't quite know where to start, then I need to give them what they need so that they can get started. They can lead their team through this roadmap that I present. And yeah, it's as long as it needs to be. And it's not that long. I mean, it's pretty typical book length. But yeah, I don't think it would have been as good of a book if I cut it in half. Yeah.
What is it that remains your facilitation challenge?
Well, it's funny that we're talking about time, because I think that's the biggest thing, is that good facilitation means that groups are engaged in a process. They're having conversations. They're doing something, right? Like, I'm just there to guide them. And clients come to me and they say, "Hey, can you do that full day program in an hour?" Like, no, why? I mean, it's going to be trash. You're going to think I'm terrible if I do that, And so and maybe that's not even a facilitation challenge. That's more of a, like, the precursor, the prep, setting expectations in advance. But that's one challenge I face quite a bit. And I feel like that's also, it's a little bit of a, like a weeding out process, that the clients who they're serious, they're like, "Wow, you can do all this in a day? You can do this in 2 days? This is amazing. Yeah, this is going to change our entire organization." I've had clients who are like, "This is going to save tens of millions of dollars if we just spend a day or day and a half on this process." I'm like, wow, cool. So now it's like almost a moot point.
Exactly. And I think that's how we must drive the conversation and the thought process. It's not, "Oh, I have an hour. What can we do in an hour? What can we do in a commute?"
Yeah.
But what is the problem?
Which we can do a lot in a commute or in an hour. We still can do some things, but it just isn't as deep. Or it might take 10 commutes.
Yes.
10 separate hours to get there, which, if that's the structure, that's fine. We can work with that.
Yeah. And I think what we just discussed about the podcast is true for workshops. And I'm glad that you do mention the full day or 2-day workshops, because there was a part of me that was wondering whether full day, 2-day, 3-day workshops are actually dead.
Oh, they're not dead completely. Maybe not as popular, but yes, I'm trying to think. Late last year, like October and December, it was interesting. I was working with this company. They're a big manufacturing company, have multiple facilities around the United States. I think they're even in Europe. And I did a training for one of them. It was a full day. We went through the creative problem solving process, and they learned about deliberate creativity, and they loved it. And usually in my workshops, we focus on a real problem the team has. So at the very least, at the end, they have lots of new ideas for their problem. And then another facility within the same company said, "Okay, can you come do that for us too?" And the first facility said, "Yeah, choose the longer option," because they had seen like a day wasn't enough. And so that's what happened. The next facility, we did a longer 2-day
Beautiful.
program.
And that's great that the client sees that, because I think the challenge then of the full day is that some say, "Oh, but I will drop in and go out, and I only have an hour, and I have to disappear here for an hour." And then I think you do need time to actually settle into the process and to open your mind and to shift gears and to really
Yeah. And then when you leave, you're there for an hour, you leave for an hour, you come back in hour 3, but you missed all of hour 2. So then hour 3 is confusing and not as valuable as if you had just stayed.
Yeah.
And I think the quality goes down.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's an opportunity for the trainer or facilitator to also say, "Okay, it's full commitment."
Yeah, exactly.
No tourists.
No tourists. I like that.
What is it that you wished you had known before?
Before what?
Before starting your journey as a facilitator, what would be your advice to your younger self?
I think what I wish I'd known earlier is that it's okay to be seen.
What do you mean by that?
I think that's partly why, as a younger facilitator, I was so shy, is like this fear of being seen. And I can remember even like in high school, just kind of playing small. Like there were times where I knew like, oh yeah, I could totally do that, but I wouldn't do it because that would have meant attention would have been on me, even like taking a leadership role or something. And I wish I had known earlier that I could provide more value if I was okay with being seen.
How did that change for you? How did you find the comfort to be seen? And what was the impact of being seen?
I think, it's definitely an evolutionary process that maybe I'm still in. But I remember, so in college, I was a part of this program that I mentioned before, where I was leading these trips. And my sophomore year of college, I transferred into the school. I went to a different school my freshman year, horrible fit, transferred to this new school my sophomore year. And then my senior year, the organization, this outdoor organization, would tease me for how shy I was my sophomore year in a light, happy way. Like they were, it was a loving way. But I really had grown a lot. And I think partly because it was an environment that was very caring, very supportive and kind, but there were also these feedback structures in place. And so I remember after every single thing we did, every training we led, every facilitation, anything where we were like in a leadership role or facilitation role, afterwards we got feedback from our co-facilitators and the participants. And then we would sit down with the leader of the organization and we'd go through the feedback together. And I remember one of the items was takes initiative. And initially, I did not take initiative. It didn't really occur to me to take initiative. But then here I was every time getting feedback of like, yes, Amy, you took initiative here. That was really helpful. Hey, could you do that more over here? Or, hey, what you shared, the way you debriefed this was excellent. It worked really well. Or, hey, next time do this instead or try this. And so getting that iterative feedback made me see what was working and what wasn't. And I think sometimes, for me at least, the fear of being seen is that, I want to do a good job. I don't want to make a fool of myself. But here I was getting that feedback that I wasn't, that I actually was providing some value and doing well. And even then, like, I graduate college, I'm still a fairly shy person. I could never have imagined giving a keynote speech at that point in my life. And now that's what I do for a living. And I think just over my career, feedback, whether it was something I sought out or I found, or somehow that has like helped me be bolder. And I think too, just that constant drive to improve. I think some people maybe have that more than others. Mine is definitely high. And so watching other people, for instance, like in the keynote setting, like watching other people on stage and seeing what they do that I like, and also realizing, oh, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to have to put myself out a little bit more. Like, so for instance, I have zero theater background. So do you have a theater background at all?
No, I don't.
So, some listeners might, but watching speakers who are like really physical with their bodies and realizing, oh, that's making them a better speaker. Like as an audience member, I'm appreciating that. And so then I find myself trying that of, bending my knees more or moving my arms more in a way that feels a little like uncomfortable.
Taking
but
space.
Then I'm taking up space, right? But then it leads to really positive results. So I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll keep doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating. Especially this taking that space. And it's funny that we're taking it so literally, because literally it doesn't take away any space from someone else if we are taking up space.
Right, I'm not like
especially standing on a stage, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny. I wonder where this comes from, but this is a different conversation.
Yeah, right. We could go on that tangent.
And I'm curious now what the role of feedback and the feedback loop for the creative process. And then, because yes, you said it is a iterative process, so the feedback is built in. And I wonder the feedback culture within a team.
Yeah.
What role this plays.
Yeah, I think it's huge. I mean, especially if the culture is a positive feedback. If the only time you're ever getting any feedback on your performance is the once a year annual performance review, I mean, that is just not helpful. That should just be a quick summary. Hey, we're just checking in. We're just formalizing everything I've been telling you for the last 12 months. But I think, yeah, I think most people crave it. They want feedback.
Yes.
They want to know, and that's what all this research says, that people really want feedback. And so I think if you can set up some systems to give and receive feedback, that can be really valuable. It doesn't have to be complicated. It could just be, short check-in conversations or
even after conversation, what did you appreciate about the other person?
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's interesting that you're saying that. It makes so much sense. And I recently read an Harvard Business Review article about there were researchers doing a study that feedback culture is actually not as relevant. It doesn't bring any benefit to companies to constantly point out how you can improve. But I think the reassuring feedback, this really has a positive impact because we do more what we are good at and we feel better and we connect more. We have this bonding.
Yeah.
And at the same time, what I hear very often from participants in trainings on feedback is how insecure they feel about giving and receiving positive feedback. Because we don't really get training on that.
No, we don't.
Which is really sad. And then I think there are many managers who would actually love to have some positive feedback because every evening they go home with a huge imposter syndrome.
Right. Exactly. Like, I think so often we just don't know one way or the other, how we're doing. And I've really shifted my ideas around positive feedback in the last 5 years or so. So my wife and I, 5 years ago, we had a foster kid move into our house, and we have now adopted her.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. But when she moved in, she was 18 years old. And so we adopted her when she was 20. She's now 23, almost 24. And she is the poster child for the benefits of positive feedback. I mean, it's like, you could like watch it, especially the first couple years she lived with us, that, we would give her positive feedback on something and it was just like, oh, she would just like blossom a little more. And then we'd give some more. And it was just amazing. You could see her behavior change sometimes within 5 minutes. And it was a great lesson for me because I don't know, I guess I was okay at it. I wasn't bad at it, but I didn't think about how important it was until watching her. And if I just gave her constructive criticism without some positive feedback, oh no, that was not going to work. So,
oh, thank you for sharing the story. That's beautiful.
Of course, yeah. It's been really cool to watch her grow over the last 5 years.
So yeah, I have this image now of positive feedback like the fertilizer.
Totally. It's like this little flower that was, it's opening up.
Yeah, you're right. I think we can all use it. And especially in companies, that's something that there must be time for.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It doesn't have to be long. I think, since that experience, I find myself doing that more, even just with friends, of just, simple like, oh, I really appreciate you calling me. Or, I'm so glad we got a chance to hang out together. This was really nice. That didn't take any time at all.
Yeah. 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 And then they might do it more often or do it with other people.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was lovely. And I will was there anything that you wanted to speak about that we didn't touch upon?
I don't think so. I feel like we talked about a lot. And yeah, thank you for having me here and letting me share a little bit about creativity and deliberate creative teams, which I just geek out about and love talking about.
Yeah, thank you. And I will put your links to how to find you, how to work with you, how to find your book in the show notes.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Miriam, for having me and for just this really cool work that you're doing around facilitation and how we work and teams. And it's awesome.
Thank you. Likewise.
Yeah.
Thank you for staying tuned and for listening until the very end. I hope that you found the inspiration and the wisdom that you are looking for. And I hope that you will subscribe to the show so that you never miss any of the interviews with another inspiring facilitator from across the world. I'm devoted to continue this podcast and to deliver weekly an episode that maintains the quality that you expect and you deserve. And if you would like to help me to maintain this quality and to keep the podcast free, please help us. Visit workshops.work/support to make a small donation to keep the podcast free. Thank you so much. I hope to be in your ears next week.